Hello, and welcome to the Publishing Executive webinar, 10 Ways Publishers Can Optimize Their Websites, sponsored by SwiftType. My name is Dennis Wilson, Editor-in-Chief of Publishing Executive and the host for today's event. Before we get started, let me take a second to point out the Tips for Attendees widget on your console. It's the blue icon with a wrench on it. If you missed the Tech Tips video we played leading up to the webinar, you can always click this widget for more information. And I also want to remind everyone to submit questions through the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can during the Q&A portion. Now, let's get to the program for today. Once publishers get readers to their sites, holding reader attention is the name of the game. Greater engagement leads to devoted audiences, more ad impressions, and readers more likely to sign up for a newsletter, attend an event, or pay for a subscription. From speed and ease of navigation to site search and content strategies, publishers must stay vigilant in their quest to create sticky on-site experiences as they vie with platforms like Facebook and Snapchat for consumer attention. In this webinar, we're going to hear how publishers can optimize their sites to meet key business objectives. And we have two great speakers that will be addressing this issue from slightly different angles. And really the common thread, which is often the case in conversations in publishing today, is data. Both presentations will explore how to learn more about what audiences want and how meeting those interests can boost publishers' businesses. Now I'll let them tell you more about that, but let me first introduce these two great speakers we have. First, Matt Riley, co-founder and CEO of SwiftType. SwiftType is a powerful enterprise search application powered by the company's own patented search and artificial intelligence technologies. Founded in 2012, SwiftType was initially funded by Y Combinator and has gone on to raise over $20 million in venture financing from leading venture capital firms. Over the course of time, the SwiftType search platform has grown to power search applications for thousands of customers, serving billions of searches every month. And customers range from major corporations like Qualcomm and DirecTV to technology startups like Shopify, Lyft, and Asana. And next we have Sal Fuentes, CEO of Decision Council. With over 25 years in strategic marketing and sales positions, Sal brings a wealth of experience in media, data, and technology. Before founding Decision Council, he served as president of Liquid Thinking, a professional services firm focused on accelerating venture-backed enterprises. And prior to Liquid Thinking, Sal was a managing partner for US Web's CKS, where he led client engagements with Novell, IBM, Televisa, Sega, and Mazda. And Sal's client engagements include Dun & Bradstreet, Salesforce.com, Spotify, Time Inc., North Star Travel Media, and Hanley Wood. So thanks to both of you for being here today. And now I'll turn the floor over to Matt to start things off.
All right, thanks, Dennis. So today I'm going to be talking about using site search data to increase engagement and conversions, and hopefully leading to many of the results that Dennis mentioned in his intro. And as we get started, I just want to be really clear about what we're talking about. What is site search in general? So site search is the searches performed within your website's content, so typically powered by some aspect of your own software, your own website, where you're searching over just your own website's data for your own customers once they've already landed on your website. So very different from Google search itself. Google will get customers to your website, and then once they're there, if they're performing searches internally, that's typically powered by what we call a site search engine. And why is the site search engine important? Primarily because the users who tend to search on your website are typically the most engaged users that you have. They're the ones who are looking for specific pieces of content, or are more engaged at least than your casual browser, who are maybe visiting for the first time and not necessarily engaged with any particular piece of content. So for those very engaged users, we think it makes a lot of sense to make sure that their visit is as good as possible. And site search, the experience through site search is one of those key components. And similarly, the downside to having bad search is that users typically do want to search, right? Searching is one of the most common things that people do on the web. There's a lot of information out there today, and people need to find a quick way to navigate it. And if they're trying to search on your website and they have a bad experience, what they'll oftentimes do is head straight back to Google to search for whatever topic it is they're looking for. And at that point, you don't really have control of your audience any longer. So at that point, Google is showing ads for pieces of content on different websites, and you might not actually get that user back. So providing a better site search user experience internally on your site allows you to keep the user engaged on your site and not lose that level of control once the user bounces out to Google. And so today, this presentation is going to cover about 4 different topics on why site search should be part of your content and website strategy. And I've talked a little bit about just creating a better user experience, but once you've created this better user experience, there are a lot of ways to then leverage the data that you get from the site search users and use that to optimize your site's content or optimize the user experience in different ways. Similarly, you'll find ways, and we'll discuss ways that you can support your SEO and content development strategies, and hopefully ultimately increase engagement and the conversion rates to things that you're targeting, such as attending events or signing up for newsletters and all those things. And we'll talk about how to leverage modern site search platforms to accomplish all of these things. But first, talking through creating a better user experience for your visitors. So the screenshot on the left is kind of what I would call a typical site search experience, and it's probably an experience most consumers are familiar with, just doing a search on a website and not getting back any results at all. Or if you do get back results, not getting things that are relevant or things that tend to make sense. And one of the common trends right now on the internet is that the places where people are actually spending a lot of their time today, places like Google or Amazon or Facebook and YouTube, they've actually all built really great search experiences over their content. So consumers today are getting very comfortable and very used to good search experiences. And the places where they're not getting these great search experiences tend to be places that are individually run or smaller websites or business-owned websites where they haven't had the opportunity to make the investment in site search that is really required. And this ends up resulting in some of the experiences you see along the right, things like bad keyword matching, not being tolerant of typos and not providing spelling corrections, not providing some of the more modern features that people tend to expect, like autocomplete drop-downs as the user is typing. Sometimes it's just slow or frustrating, and many times none of this works very well on mobile. So a more modern approach to site search can allow you to have many of these features solved for you out of the box, and will result in better user experience in general. A case study from a customer of ours, which is TechCrunch. We power site search on the TechCrunch website and took over what was originally a Google site search installation and replaced it with a search engine powered by SwiftType. And after that installation, after the migration over to the SwiftType platform, they saw their search volume increase by 30% and the search exit rate decreased by 50%. And this was without really doing any kind of extracurricular optimization beyond just replacing it with, replacing their search engine with search powered by SwiftType that has more modern controls, more modern user experience, things like typo correction, spelling completion, all of those things. And so you can see that you'll get pretty good results even by doing just the basics of swapping out for a more modern tool. So as I mentioned, once you get a new search engine installed on your website, there's a goldmine of user analytics that can be collected once users are interacting with the search engine more often and hopefully having a better experience. Obviously, some of the most important things are just looking at what the most commonly searched for terms on your website will be. These are going to tell you things like, what topics are people most interested in, what things are people seeking when they're actually visiting the site and have read maybe a piece of content and want to move on to more topics. More modern tools, you can get some of these analytics from a lot of different software platforms. The SwiftType platform provides all of these out of the box, but this is just simple user engagement tracking. And similarly, analytics of that same sort can support your SEO and content development strategy. So on the flip side of things that people are searching for most often, we can also show you things that people are searching for that aren't returning results today, or that maybe they are returning results, but the users aren't actually clicking on any of the results. And that's typically an indicator of a gap in the content on the website. So if they're searching for something and they're not getting results, and it's quite a popular search term, it's a good indicator to an editorial team or someone at the site to create content to fill that gap. It's obviously something users are seeking, and you want to make sure that they're getting what they're looking for. Another case study to highlight here from another one of our customers, the customer called Drama Fever. They're a media website, and they license content from other producers to serve to their own users, and they actually rely really heavily on the weekly analytics emails that we send out based on the user behavior that we're tracking on their website. And they're looking through things like the top searches that don't have results, so that they know which TV shows are becoming more popular and which pieces of content they want to license for their website so that they can add to their content library. And they're using their users and their actual user behavior, their most engaged user behavior, to guide them in making those licensing decisions. And so finally, speaking through how you can take different types of analytics and use them to increase user engagement. So this is a screenshot of the SwiftType dashboard that allows you to incorporate different metrics into the way your search engine ranks pieces of content on your website. So a typical website search engine will oftentimes search through the titles of different pieces of content. Maybe it will also search through the body text of the web page, but they oftentimes don't incorporate other signals that can be very helpful in teaching or in helping you rank content. A very simple example of that would be using a signal like how recently a piece of content was published or updated. Oftentimes you'll want to bias that towards the top of search results, all other things being considered equal. And similarly, you could take a signal like something like the total number of comments on an article, or the total number of times it's been shared on social media and retweeted. Taking those things into account alongside the more basic signals such as general keywords in the title or in the body of the page. What you really want to do is build a mix of those things, and as you incorporate these different signals based on different types of user engagement, you'll find that it's a kind of recurring feedback loop, and people will continue to engage more with those more engaged pieces of content, and you can get more out of that over time. Another way of increasing engagement is simply to use editorial controls over the pieces of content returned in a result set. So the SwiftType dashboard here again allows our customers to customize the result set on a specific keyword. So if you have, say, your top 20 or 30 most high traffic keywords, the things that people are searching for most often, a tool like SwiftType will allow you to go in and actually curate the order of the result sets. You can add and remove results as you wish, and it allows you to do things like in the example shown here. If you have a conference coming up, you could pull that to the very top of the result page, and typically users are going to be clicking something along the top 1, 2, or 3 users, or 1, 2, or 3 results, and so if you move something to the very top, it's going to get a lot more click-throughs, and that will generally provide the kind of promotion that you're looking for. Finally, I think the whole goal of all of this is to drive general conversions, and conversion can mean many different things from every different website, but through a site search tool like ours, you're able to actually track which of those keywords are leading to your conversions. So you can see that a user is, users are oftentimes searching for keyword X, and over time, after they've done that search, they end up subscribing to the newsletter or downloading a piece of content or whatever it happens to be. Tracking all of that stuff back through keywords is going to tell you which types of content are being engaged with the most often by the kinds of customers who you're converting. And that will, again, lead into many of the things we've already discussed around building more content related to those keywords and making sure that you're curating the content on those keywords so that you're leading people into the right pieces of content. We've seen this have great effect for another customer of ours called EO Media. They increased visitor engagement by 175% and increased ad revenue by 145% just by using these content curation tools, all for customers who have done a search on the website. And that's it for me. At this point, I think I'm going to hand it off to Sal.
That was a great quick transition, and now I just have to get the slide up. So I'll be right there. Hi, everyone. I'm Sal Fuentes, CEO of Decision Council. And first of all, I want to thank Dennis and Matt for letting me join the discussion today. I'm excited to be virtually here for one reason. I think this topic is just amazing. I think the way we think about creating site experience and design is so different from where we were even 3 years ago that these kinds of challenges are just fun to address. For those of you who don't know us, Decision Council is a San Francisco Bay Area based firm. We specialize in working with data, media, and technology companies. And quite often the companies we work with are operating at the convergence of the three. Our work usually focuses on evolution, whether that be enhancing user experience, reinventing brands, product development and competitiveness, even team facilitation. It's always about sort of what's next and what's coming forward. For the sake of today's discussion, I wanted to tap into a powerful challenge that we talk about with a lot of the CEOs we work with. And it's a pretty simple thing, but it's affecting the entire media landscape. This concept that identity and data are now better than the traditional media outlets of audience, brand, and content. You don't know how many media CEOs I talk to that are convinced that audience, brand, and content will protect them from some of the major players out there who are attacking their markets. And I think what we're starting to see that if that's going to be the case, then we have to raise our game across the board digitally. We have to start to address things at the data level and wrap our designs around the data level. And I think there's been two big drivers of this. If you're on the B2B side, we're seeing ABM everywhere, right? Account-based management is dominating the landscape. It's, from a technology standpoint, it's the #1 investment category across business. The content marketing expenses that go into ABM are through the roof. And then on the consumer side, particularly because of the dominance of Facebook and Google, you're starting to see the advent of people-based marketing. Lots of work in the identity space, lots of work in just constant content personalization. I'm sure tons of you are Facebook users. Think about how relevant that ad experience is now, how relevant the content they feed you is now, and how do we start to look at addressing our audiences who are now having their expectations set by companies who have embraced people-based marketing across the board. And what's even more daunting is when you take a look at how much money is going into the category. There have been, Acxiom acquiring LiveRamp, Oracle and Datalogix, just the individual in-house investments that Facebook and Adobe have made. People are attacking the identity issue at a huge level. And if you even look at what the consortiums are doing, what I'm showing you here is just a data map of what LiveRamp looks at. This is an Acxiom company, and all the different data points they're tracking and trying to build the identity of just one person. I'll be honest with you, when I first saw this deck, I changed all my privacy settings. I opened everything up because when I realized the amount of data being converged on an individual identity, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to fight the fight anymore. But it brings up a really, really interesting question for people who are in the process of designing the next generation of websites and in the process of designing the next generation of solutions. There we go. Just pushing the slide here real quick. What's the relationship between data and products in your digital strategy? One of the things that I really caution CEOs against is measuring the website by ad revenue, by measuring the website by pure direct revenue. Because the reality is that websites have become, at their core, the hub of all associated media revenue. How do you facilitate your events? How do you facilitate the applications that you're offering your market? Hey, where do my subscribers sign up and change their print information? When you look at all of the individual data touch points that a brand has with its audience, and you look at all the different things that flow through the website, the reality is to measure any site or centralized sort of digital depository, if you will, from just a ad revenue or event revenue is actually a real myopic way of doing it. You have to open up and look at, this is the centerpiece of not only my data acquisition, but my data communication and my ability, whether it be something like search that we just found out about for direct communication, but also indirect ability to take data attribution and apply it to a profile. So let's start with the most basic issue. The idea of an anonymous user versus a known user. I think we all know the worst experience in the world is you go to a restaurant that you go to 3 times a week, you sit down, the waiter doesn't remember your name, doesn't know your order, has no idea what your cocktail is, right? People hate anonymous generic experience. And the reality is when brands show in a digital landscape that they know you, that they actually are aware of your preferences and the things you are interested in, it just improves customer experience across the board. But the reality is most people aren't anonymous anymore. They're known to somebody. And I think that's the funny thing is when somebody says, what do I do about users who come to the site anonymously? I'm like, they're only anonymous to you, right? They're known to somebody. If they've got any kind of mobile device, we know their geographic location, we know their browsing device, someone has a profile on them, right? The referring site they came from has information on it. IP can tell you who they probably work for. Somebody in the data world has their job function and title. The truth is very few people are anonymous in the market. The question is do you want to wait the time to build your own understanding, or do you want to buy the understanding early so that you can immediately start to customize the experience? And there's a number of ways to do that, obviously. And then you take it up a level with the people you already know. You can create even better experiences. You probably know their content interest. You know the events they've attended. You probably have data and research subscriptions or reports that they've downloaded. If they've ever participated in a webcast, if they've ever participated in any kind of white paper download, you probably have lead generation information. And then if you have a set of mobile apps, you probably have some great mobile application data that you can apply to it. The reality is the ability to build a profile quickly is there. What happens is very few companies have invested in the upfront technology for attribution, and they look at it from a simple taxonomy topic level, and they don't go down to a deep enough level to say, wow, there's a ton of insight here that I need to be tapping into. So I apologize for this because it's probably an eye chart on a small screen, so to any of you on laptops, my apologies. But if you just take a core look at some of the information you have, you can see how you can dynamically present, whether it's offerings, data, events, research, all of it based on a different level of data. The problem is it takes time to actually build out your content strategy for each of these data points. And most companies don't have the discipline to actually go through and map, hey, if this person's in this location, what do I do with it? I was going to share this in success stories, but I think it's a more appropriate point here that there's great data from a provider named Omida about event promotion, that if somebody's within 30 miles to 60 miles of one of your industry events, you don't need to discount. The odds are if they're going to attend, they don't mind paying full price because they don't have transportation, they don't have lodging issues. They're probably just going to go to the event and commute. Those are the people you don't discount to, even if you start to feel date pressure. So they did some really great algorithmic analysis and said, look, based on geographic distance, based on someone's location, here's the price points you should promote for a given set of events. That's one example of a way you can just look at one piece of data and start to make a specific recommendation. Now you start doing that by multiple data attributes, you start to create more relevant experiences. So acquiring and activating the data is really the essential. If you want to build great customer journeys, and almost every brand that we work with on at the major brand level, both on the B2B and on the consumer side, have started to embrace customer journeys across the board. We find that a lot of the programs we're creating are specifically targeted to specific functions, and we're basically creating user workflows, and we're creating sort of content strategies around each specific step of the customer journey. And it comes down to three essential questions. How will you identify users? How will you modify their experience based on what you know about them? And how will you continue to capture and improve the user data? One of the most common questions we get is gating versus not gating content. And two is basically how much to ask and when to ask. And one of the problems is people think of this as sort of a single point. They think of, what do I ask for this white paper? Or what do I ask for this webcast? Instead of thinking, well, over a period of time, I'm going to get to engage with this person on 3 or 4 different things. So if I've already got their business card data, well, let's focus on 2 sort of firmographic questions. If I've already got a decent profile, let's start to get into the psychographics of the user. The reality is you don't have to get everything all at once if you have a pretty good threaded user strategy. The second thing is just I'm going to say this, and I know some people will go crazy. I would gate everything that's super valuable. I know gating cuts your numbers down, but the reality is if you're dealing with someone who's a real qualified member of any given community, any given market, and your content is legitimate, they're going to be willing to hand off. They understand that it's a trade-off between access and information, and they're willing to do it. We see a lot of inflated numbers, particularly on the B2B side. We see this. We don't see this as much on consumer, but we see inflated audiences that perform really badly in lead gen and event and other cross omni-channel programs, and it's because they don't gate, they don't qualify enough, and you basically have a bunch of empty names who are just really what I would call snackable content people. They saw a cool little soundbite and they came to it. So there's a ton of companies out there. I'm not here to say there's only one right way to do it, but there's a ton of companies out there who are providing sort of identity sets. There's a few companies who are helping with company firmographic profiles. I know D&B very well because they're one of our clients. If you are a D&B customer, they can tell you, hey, this is the person's business card info, here's the company they're attached to, this is the IP address that they just came in from. They can give you a lot of immediate information that you can react to at any given time. And I wouldn't say there's any one person who's figured this out, but based on your specific market segment, you can do a combination of identity, you can do a combination of B2B data, and you can put it together to start to create profiles pretty quickly. The other thing I would really recommend to almost anybody is to find an identity graph to plug into. And the reason is this. There's a few consortiums out there. LiveRamp has been a big part of it with, I want to say AppNexus is their partner. Viant is the Time Warner, the Time Inc. play in the space. LiveIntent does a great job with an email-based identity graph. Facebook and Google aren't going to share information with you. So if you're not building identity graphs for with your own technology internally and continue to do attribution, you probably want to be part of somebody else's. And just the idea that you can start to share data attribution and get data that you don't have, particularly if you're in vertical segments, this works really well because you're probably going to be dealing with non-competitive data sets, and you can do it. And even if you're on the B2B side, I'd encourage you to get the consumer profiles. Because if you have your market's consumer profiles, you know where to push your retargeting strategies, how to do any omni-channel programs. It allows you to think out of the box. So here are just some ideas to get started. I know there's a ton here. Be device specific. One of the things that I was personally really surprised by when we look at the metrics that we get from our clients is video on mobile. It is so powerful, and yet so many of our customers don't have, videos in the first 3 to 4 scrolls of a page, right? Just the reality is people are absorbing video, they're watching it on trains, they're taking 5 minutes out of their day to look at it. I would honestly look at your device metrics and see what content they're consuming. Location, location, location. I don't know how many of you are New York Times subscribers, but I'm on the West Coast. I go through my feed. There's my California Today briefing. They are just fantastic at it, and they do a really good job. Constantly adjust the content mix. Publishers and editors have not kept up with what data means to content. I would absolutely encourage taking your data that you're getting about your user content consumption behavior, about who your audience is, and sitting down with your publishers and editors and creating content strategies that actually stick. Particularly the search data. I was just thinking as I was listening to the first half of this, how powerful you combine search data with data attribution and user profiles. You're going to get a 360-degree view of what your content strategy should be, and that's pretty cool. We talked about getting for data capture, community engagement. One of the things that we've seen is really powerful is community broadcasting around battleship events, taking everybody is at a physical event and just dropping community content on them with an after effect for the week after, just to keep them engaged. And obviously professional or interest-based event management tends to do very well when you have a good sense of who someone is. Just a few examples out there. Access intelligence, New York Times, we talked about it. My best example of this, and we actually had a video, and we just couldn't get the video to work. If any of you have a Spotify account, you know that you get an amazing playlist every Monday, and it's based on your user behavior. It's based on your listening preferences. But what's amazing about it, it's music you've never listened to. You've never listened to it on Spotify, at least. Spotify takes all of that data and then literally guesses, hey, because they've shown an interest and a propensity to like this, we think they're going to like this. And I cannot tell you how magical that experience is. It's one of the most popular features. What's in common with all of these companies is that they've made the investment in either a CMS that can dynamically deliver content in real time, or they've made the investment in analytics packages that create the queries that get the CMS to behave. This takes a discipline between data gathering, content strategy and recommendation, CMSs, and analytics. And across the board, this is fairly sophisticated stuff. And so I would really encourage you, we're starting to see the big players do it. You guys have seen what Amazon does. I didn't want to jump into the generic explanations. You've seen Apple Music recommendations. You've seen Amazon and what it can do with Prime users and the kind of recommendations that are happening there. Here's the thing, the consumerization of the app experience is now affecting the entire media landscape. And we're going to have to react to it because that is the user expectation. As Matt talked about in the search expectation, they're having amazing search experiences out there. They're now having amazing data-driven experiences. Waze is my favorite example, an entirely algorithm set of directions that gets you to work faster. It's expected now, and I think it's common now. So that is it for me, and I'm going to hand it back, but thanks for listening.
Thanks, Sal. That was great, and thanks, Matt, as well. So we're going to turn to some audience Q&A, and you continue to submit questions if you have some. So to start things off, I knew we'd get questions about metrics. So here's a question for Matt first. You mentioned EO Media had pretty impressive results in increasing customer engagement, and somebody who's curious about how you're measuring customer engagement in that case. What metrics are you looking at?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In the instance of TechCrunch, the way that we were measuring customer engagement was simply by customer page views. And I know that the question indicates an interest in whether or not that had a direct impact on revenue. We unfortunately don't have that specific data for TechCrunch specifically, but for the EO Media case, we do have that information, and the way that they were increasing ad revenue very specifically was through opening up new ad selling opportunities. They basically were using their site search analytics to understand that their customers were searching for keywords that they weren't previously aware were so popular or so frequently searched, and it allowed them to actually go out and sell ads against those keywords to a new market of people. And because they were so high traffic, it actually had a pretty demonstrated increase in their overall ad revenue. Similarly with EO Media, they had a pretty large increase in the total number of page views after a search was performed. So those are the kinds of audience segmentation tools that we typically ask people to measure by to see what the effect of improved search is, and they were seeing a much higher rate of increased page views after a user has actually performed a search. And so again, the increased ad revenue from that increase in traffic amongst those that specific segment of customers is what we were measuring there. And all of this information is actually published on our website in our customer case studies, so you guys can go and if you're interested in more of the details, just visit our site and find the EO Media and TechCrunch case studies, which are published there.
Great, thanks, Matt. Sal, let me give you a metrics question. You covered a broader range of ground, but are there any key metrics that you think publishers should really be mindful of? Or you did mention a specific case of the importance of sitting down with editorial and business to look at content consumption metrics. So in that case, maybe what kind of content consumption metrics do you think are really important, or does it vary by publisher?
Thanks for asking the question. I think that we've seen a huge focus with editorial on content topic, right? It seems to be a real popular thing. What content topics are people looking at? Taxonomical type information. I think what's really interesting is to take them into the content types and what really the digestion patterns are, to take them into geography. One of the things that we found really interesting is the level of technical sophistication around major cities to rural areas, and how you usually see a trend towards tech content versus business content. There's just some differences in how different geographies look at things. One company that's amazing at this and very tech savvy, believe it or not, is Farm Journal. Right, Farm Journal has a very interesting geo-dispersion, yet incredibly heavy tech content metrics. I think it's a pretty amazing thing. So I would definitely take a look at that. I think the other thing is just what other brands, when you join, if you're doing a really good cookie model or you're doing a really decent attribution model, what other brands are your audiences affiliated with? I think understanding your brand adjacencies content-wise will have a big difference, particularly in retargeting and omni-channel programs.
Thanks, Sal. So let's turn a little bit to audience development. Not surprisingly, we got quite a few questions around that. Really quickly, somebody asked what gating is. I think the short answer is gating is another way of saying putting up a wall in front of a piece of content and requiring the user to submit some data in order to view that content. There's a lot of different ways to do that, whether that's a landing page with a PDF or just a gated form. But there's a question here that I think speaks to the varying degrees of sophistication when it comes to a publisher's ability to personalize recommendations. So this person's question is, our CMS will only let us do personalized recommendations if we make people log in. We haven't wanted to make visitors do that. Should we get over the assumption that people just won't bother? So I'll leave that up to either of you if you want to take that.
I'll tackle that. So one, they probably only have to register once. I know that information management and I'm trying to think of another one. A couple of the source media titles require first-time email registration. And then they're an identified user from now on, and they don't require it afterwards. They've seen very little drop-off in their numbers. I am a firm believer that, particularly in vertical markets and if you have a unique content offering, you absolutely can do it. If you're in a more competitive thing, like say news, right, then you have to be a little bit more careful. But there's usually one featured piece of content that works really well. The top 100 restaurant annual report, for example, at most major publications is usually something you can download, but you can download it after you enter some kind of information. I think we are moving towards an identified world. And the other thing I was trying to point out, I hope the presentation pointed out, was that there are ways to get identity and who someone is without actually doing registration over a period of time. You can build profiles using some kind of identity graph. And that's one thing I didn't make. I apologize really quick. There are technologies for building your own identity graphs. If you want to do this yourself and do attribution and manage all this, they are out there. It just takes a little bit longer.
Great. And Matt, from a site search analytics standpoint, what ways do you see audience development people using some of those analytics, or should they be using those analytics to drive audience development? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's exactly the same sort of way that I would imagine audience development people are using the other visitor data that they're getting from their website around what content are they most engaged with, what are the kinds of things that the most engaged customers you have or visitors you have today, what are they focusing on, and then using that to inform either your marketing strategy or who you're reaching out to try to drive more viewers to the site. The thing that's, I think, unique about site search data is that it's a very explicit expression of a user's intent, right? So rather than trying to interpret or imagine what users are thinking when they're clicking around on your website and getting that kind of summary data from a tool like Google Analytics, it's telling you, where people are spending their time. Something like site search is a much more explicit expression of what they're actually looking for or what it is that they're intending to do on your website. So it's, I think, a really nice complement to the general content-based analytics and click-through-based analytics that you get from out of the box from a tool like Google Analytics.
Right, and I imagine audience development and editorial are kind of working to identify some of those really valuable pieces of content together. So here's a little bit more of a tactical question. What's the best page placement for related content, and do thumbnails make a big difference when displaying related stories? I think you probably extend it to results and searches. So I'll let either you take that, but maybe also speak to, how you might, as opposed to giving a broad answer for everybody's site, how might somebody ascertain that for themselves in terms of placement for related content and whether thumbnails are a good idea? Sal, do you want to try that first?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I think the problem is as we've come to, so many people are doing responsive designs, right, that page placement becomes variable depending on the screen collapse. So I think it's just a matter, one, of what is relevancy. I think, not to be critical, because I know a lot of us are in this place, taxonomy only is not relevancy, right? An article on business intelligence needs to be, shouldn't just be affiliated with anything that's just business intelligence. It's got to have some specificity to that specific article. And I think that's something that we get in trouble with is there's sort of this genericized idea of adjacent content. I think one, more importantly than placement, is how good did you actually consider the adjacency? Is your technology giving you really relevant associated content? Placement-wise, I'm a big fan. I've always been a big fan of upper right, just because it's in my eyesight and I'm reading left to right to the upper right. So if I see something else, I tend to be. That's primarily in a PC view. On a mobile view, quite frankly, on the bottom of the article, right after I finish the article. Secondarily, I would really, if you guys look at what e-commerce companies do, I'm a big fan. If you get an article a day or two later that's really relevant to the last article that person consumed and they did maybe 2 page clicks or scroll to the bottom, send them an email. Say, hey, I got 2 other cool articles on this and you might be interested in it. They don't tend to be upset about that. That doesn't tend to feel like spam.
Great. Thanks, Sal. And Matt, why don't you have the last word, and then I'll wrap things up.
Yeah, I would just, I think I would echo a lot of what Sal said about that. Certainly on mobile, having related content be at the bottom of an article after you finish reading it, but I think that also has, kind of this implicit, you're implicitly saying that it's something I believe, which is that you don't really have an opportunity to drive people to related content or recommended content unless you've already sort of satisfied their idea of the thing that they came to the site for. So you don't want to be pushing it, right at the top of the page, at least in my opinion, or being too aggressive with that content, because the first and foremost goal should be to make sure that they are getting through the piece of content that they came to the site for in the first place. And then, hopefully if you do a good job of that and the user experience is nice, then you do have the opportunity to keep engaging them. So I agree with putting that kind of at the bottom once the user has made it through what they originally intended.
Great. All right. Well, it looks like we're going to wrap things up here for today. On behalf of Publishing Executive and SwiftType, I want to thank both our speakers, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all of our archived and upcoming webinars. And if you would just take a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen next, we would be very grateful. Your feedback will influence the webinars we bring to you in the future, and I hope to see you at the next Publishing Executive webinar.